Yo, the name's Alpern, and the time has finally come for another meta snapshot following the latest release of patch 1.6.5, which built upon 1.6. Now, post 1.6, there was a bit of a chaotic period with the introduction of the two new battle groups, and I figured there was really only Wehrmacht that had a clearly defined meta, and as such I postponed making any snapshots. However, since 1.6.5, the other factions has settled quite a bit, and that's what I'll be trying to summarize here. I'll also note that I'm a bit extra generous today, as I think things are still moving a bit, and as such I'll note two battle groups per faction. Remember that in these snapshots I don't really specify any build orders, but I simply point at units and some teching paths, as well as battle groups that are strong enough and used often enough to justify calling them meta. Now, this summary is mainly for 1v1s, as there is too many variables in team games to really give a quick summary. Now let's begin with the USF faction, which has had quite a shift since the previous snapshot, even though Armored remains a top pick. It's more notably due to the heavy use of assault engineers, which you essentially open with multiple of to use as a mainline infantry unit. This is especially useful on garrison heavy maps, as they are CQC and have access to the flamethrowers. Their early strength generally gets followed up by 30 cal machine guns, meaning you go tier 2 and not tier 1 for once, before getting ISC with captain, and then you rush out an early half track. You could argue here that mechanized support center would make more sense due to the half track's easier access, but it turns out that having an extra free unit is better than some super situational slow repairs. Usually these builds then follows this up with more machine guns, and notably Zooks, especially versus DAC, and before you transition to either multiple for Chaffees and M8s, which you essentially mass depending on what you're facing, and then you can follow that up by calling in the EC8s. However, if you're winning massively, which you often are due to the massive power spike and timing of the A half track, you can even rush tier 4 here by skipping motor pull altogether and getting a super fast ECA. Apart from Armored, there's also been a heavy rise of the advanced infantry battle group, utilizing riflemen and turning them into rangers. This also sees infantry support center. However, these builds generally also make heavy use of some of the ISC upgrades, such as logistics, making those rangers cheaper, and as you'll be spending all manpower early on rangers, you really don't tend to slow down your vehicle timing by spending your fuel on the ISC upgrades, as those vehicles would be hitting late either way with the manpower restriction. For anti-tank, you sometimes see the Ranger loot box being utilized with jackpot Zooks, or the use of motor pool into anti-tank guns or Chaffees, or sometimes backtaking tier 2 for Zooks instead, and sometimes doing both, as well as getting demolitions package for heavy M6 AT mines for ISC. There is really no constrictions here. If game goes late, there's always that tier 4 with Hellcats and dozers if necessary, though you can easily survive with heavy infantry versus most Axis compositions. As per usual for USF, Med Tent always gets picked. Moving on to Wehrmacht, there is the quite notorious Breakthrough battle group, which uses multiple grenadiers with MP40s, generally supported by a machine gun. I say you should almost always go for the veteran quarters here as well, but I don't think that's always the case, as with the extremely heavy fuel price tag, it very often doesn't pay off, and instead slows down your verbal timing, which is the vehicle you will be headlining for with Breakthrough. This is because the battle group lends itself very nicely to tier 2, as you get the increased production for fast verbals as well as the panic martyr if needed, but you can easily stall staying tier 2 until you can call in a tiger in late games. Often you also see the flak guns more often if things go poorly, and the first couple of verbals are generally followed up by Jaegers, as that's when you can finally afford Shreks after putting the initial munitions into MP40s and the heal bunker. Now for the other battle group, I'm being very generous, as I don't think it's nearly as strong as a Breakthrough. However, it's been extremely popular to see on the ladder, which I think is due to how the games are a bit more entertaining and not necessarily because it's better than Breakthrough. And this is of course the mechanized battle group, which while it does use grenadiers, rarely sees more than 2. Sometimes even only 1 grenadier with something like a double machine gun or even double Ketten before rushing out P-grens from tier 3, skipping tier 2 entirely. Here you then make Panzergrens with 80 guns for support, and you have the 8 rad call-ins that work nicely with tier 3, as it's much cheaper and a better vehicle than Stug will ever be, and its Vet 1 bonuses synergizes heavily with the 80 guns from tier 3. After this, there's a bit of a split depending on whether you go tier 4 or not. But if you do go tier 4, you see the Brumbears before making Panthers, or in desperate situations you then stay in tier 3 and you call in those Panthers. As I previously mentioned, for the Breakthrough battle group, Wehrmacht I'd say in general now always makes heavy use of Medbunker instead of going in the HQ healing, and this is because it helps you keep up with the allied economy while simply being cheaper in terms of the fuel resources. Moving on to UKF, Indian artillery still remains a top pick. However, since the 1.6 nerf of the Polsten, the heavy mortar ends up being quite rare to see, but you still see Gurkhas with a strong manpower economy. Matilda and Grant still dominates the late game here, so most notable change I'd say is really the heavy use of Dingo, but that I'd say goes for UKF in general. Now, Australian defense also sees a metric ton of play, sometimes even without Dingo, though I recommend you to always make a Dingo, because it's very strong. But then you also of course get the Australian Lights together with 2-pounders to stall before hitting that Magran Tilda late game. I would say that all training sees play, but that would be a lie, because I still barely if ever see light vehicle training. With that said, however, there is quite a few Stuarts out there, but the Stuart is mostly as built as a reactionary unit, so I decided against listing it here. Now for the final black sheep of the factions, I actually really struggled to summarize something for Dak that could be expressed and conveyed within a few minutes. I actually think Dak struggles quite a bit right now, and everything does feel quite mediocre. I'd say armored support still remains a top pick, basically unchanged, but it does feel a lot worse with allies becoming a bit more figured out. However, I would also like to throw a leg to Italian combined arms, which has become very popular as of the past few months, which sees heavy Bersaglieri investments, generally getting something like 3 Bursas with a bike in between, going heavily into the Bursa upgrade path of the battle group before getting very early healing, and then you support the Bursas with the usual suspect support weapons. For this you generally stay tier 1 for quite some time with this build, though Flak Fearling is extremely common and often can be built quite late even, depending on whether or not you need the vehicle. However, the goal of these builds is usually to sort of stall for a very long time before trying to hit a fast Tiger timing. Now, I keep seeing people running this and I've been facing it myself numerous times, but I must admit I am struggling a bit to pull it off myself. However, many of your other options as Dak does feel quite poor, so perhaps that makes the Tiger sort of the shining light in the tunnel, I guess. And I can sort of see how this opener is probably the best way to hit that Tiger as fast as possible, but I'm not convinced this is the optimal route. As for the armory upgrades, I'd recommend these 4 in order, as they are all of very good use, and if you somehow can get all 4 with a sort of competitive composition as a backbone, you should be in a really good position. And yeah, that's a quick summary of my perception of the meta. For more specific builds, I do recommend you to check out Cohdb, where you can see the specific builds players use by clicking on an uploaded replay. In the meantime, thanks for watching.